What's up, gang? Thanks for the... What's up, gang? What's up, gang?
Man,
Thanks for joining the...
getting up on the wrong foot here, man.
Fuck. See, this is why we don't do live shows yet. All right.
You gotta include this. This is all going in.
What's up, gang? Thanks for joining the Undiplomatic Podcast, the show with undiplomatic takes about the foreign policy scene. I'm Van Jackson, here with my new shit-talking co-hosts, both of whom should be household names to undiplomatic listeners because they're past guests, Julia Gledhill and Matt Duss. Welcome, friends.
Really excited to be here. I just want to say for listeners that Van screwed up that intro, and if he cut it out, like don't let him get away with
it. Hi, y'all. Stoked to be here.
This is how we're starting off. This is how we're doing.
I may have to leave it in now. Fuck. Can you both just say a quick word about who you are and where you hang your hat?
I'm Julia Gledhill. I work on all things Pentagon spending related. I am new to the Stimson Center. I started here a month ago, and I came from the Project on Government Oversight, where I focused a lot on contractors, price gouging the military, and acquisition issues.
I'm Matt Duss. I'm the Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, previously Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and before that, think tank drone at various places. I was head of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I was at the Center for American Progress, and then a journalist, before and during those times. Longtime listener and fan of this podcast, and really excited to be joining it.
Yes, and multiple time contributor prior to becoming a co-host. So
yes,
welcome. So our opening segment on these episodes, this is going to be one of the variety episodes. It's going to be where we most directly cover what's in the news. So critical hot takes in response to, what's going on in the real world. And topically, dear listeners, you might hear or read about the stuff in this segment, in 100 different places, but it's our sort of special vibe of sense making, the perspective we bring. That's something that's distinct. So on that, Matt, do you have something to kick us off with on like a Biden ceasefire deal?
Sure. I mean, I published a piece yesterday for MSNBC on, I think, what the big takeaways are from the deal. And
I missed that piece, by the way, so I need to...
You missed it, man?
Yeah.
That's outrageous. So again, going public the way he did was, in its way, a kind of escalation. It was an effort by Biden to sort of box in Netanyahu and also to put pressure on Hamas to end the war. And I think that is that's part of the big news, is that Biden, Hamas's condition in previous rounds and previous ceasefire negotiations, they want this war to end. And that is something that the Israelis have been hesitant or unwilling to offer. I mean, so Biden is now endorsing that position. And what he said about it being an Israeli proposal, I think is right. I think a lot of people have been out there pointing to statements from other Israeli ministers, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, kind of casting doubt on it. I mean, I from what I've heard and folks I've talked to, I mean, this was generated from the Israeli side. But there's always the question of how much is the Israeli government bought into it. And as
they're not owning it, right? I mean, that's the problem.
Right. They're not fully owning it. And as I wrote in the piece, I mean, what Netanyahu's doing is kind of a familiar play. Like whenever he is, faced with a tough choice, he tends to play for time, and he tends to make provocative statements or take provocative steps that he hopes will induce the other side, the Palestinian side, to make a move or reject it. We saw this repeatedly in, when Obama was trying to kind of do peace talks, where you'd see settlement announcements, or you see, Netanyahu say something or do something that would basically convince the Palestinians that this guy, once again, is not negotiating in good faith. And then they kind of walk away from the table. And then Netanyahu goes, well, look, once again, the Palestinians have walked away from the table. And I think that's kind of one of his goals here, is to say, whatever President Biden had said, we're still coming to kill you, Hamas, in the hopes that Hamas will be the ones to say, well, that's not what we're going to agree to. We do not agree to Israel coming to kill us after this ceasefire. And that's not to say that there's no blame on Hamas's side, certainly, obviously, for October 7th itself, but also, in terms of the Hamas leadership, as horrible as this has been, and it has been absolutely catastrophic for the people of Gaza. I mean, Hamas, there are some, I think what I've heard from people who are closer to Hamas, and there are clearly some who want to cut their losses at this point and just survive. But there's another kind of another trend, which is like we are in a good position now, even though Gaza has been destroyed. We have the initiative. We've once again seized the resistance mantle for the Palestinians. But still, I think the important takeaway was that Biden, by going public, and this is a politician who really likes to work in private. He really prefers to kind of do his cajoling and criticizing and pushing behind closed doors. And the fact that he made this offer public, as he did on Friday, was, again, out of character and an escalation for him. But the last point I'll make here is, Biden, in a sense, has boxed himself in a little bit by saying what he did, that Israel has now achieved its key goal of the war, which is preventing another October 7th. So having said that Israel has now achieved that aim, how could you possibly continue supporting the war even if this deal falls through? And I think that for me was a really important statement, and we'll see how they respond to that.
Israel hasn't conceded that point, have they, though? Like, they haven't said that we've eradicated Hamas's ability to do another October 7th. So politically, it's really interesting that he has framed it as their agreement when that seems to be the kind of central frame in changing the way that turning the tide on the way we talk about Israel aid.
Right. No, Netanyahu has continued to say that our goals have not changed. That was his quote. Our goal is, the eradication of Hamas and complete victory, whatever that means. And that is, of course, just a formula for endless war.
Literally,
But I think it is important that Biden has said that, even if they don't agree. That is the position of the U.S. president. So having said that, President Biden, what would then be your justification for continuing this war? It cannot be self-defense. They've achieved their goal of defense, according to you.
This is kind of nuts, man. I need to read your piece. There's so much shit in the information sphere that I just missed it. But like, I would rather Biden be talking about a ceasefire than not. I'd rather that be a public thing. If it needs to be, to make something happen, it's better that there's a proposal on the table than not. But it's kind of not serious if first of all, if really Israel's not fully bought in, but also like if there aren't costs or consequences for continuing to refuse a ceasefire, that's a problem. Like that's a massive limitation of all of this. So
that's right. And that's always been a problem with U.S. policy here. And that's a point I make in the piece as well. It's like, what if Netanyahu says no? What are you willing to do? And I think that kind of relates to the point I was making of what Biden has said about them having achieved their goals. I mean, in my view, there's no justification for continuing to support this, regardless of whether this is successful or not.
One of the things I worry about is like moving the goalposts in terms of what logic is at play.
Yeah.
Like the actual goals of eradicating Hamas or self-defense or preventing October 7th from happening again, like those goals can be fixed, but the rationales or the justifications that get invoked, it's just this moving target thing.
Yeah.
And it makes it feel like the violence is the point. It makes it feel like they can't be trapped into doing the right thing. And that's worrying to me.
Yeah. Right. And the missing piece has always been consequences for saying no. I mean, and that is why I'm skeptical. I mean, like the peace process is littered with the bodies of plans that sought to box Netanyahu in by pressuring him to make a choice. Because if there's no downside to just saying no or just delaying, then you've not boxed anyone in.
Yeah.
I also just don't understand. I understand that this plan is 3 phases. The third phase is allowing Palestinians to quote unquote return to their homes. It's like, what homes?
Right.
We're rebranding, we're rebranding, you know, a ceasefire deal that has gone through several iterations at this stage, calling it Israel's and talking about the day after. But the first two phases are like, oh, first let's get out the women and children. Second phase, you know, everyone, have all Israeli forces get out of Gaza. We can release all hostages, and then finally talk about the day after. But I just the frame makes absolutely no sense in terms of allowing Palestinians to come back to this land. I mean, we all know Israel has been very forthright about what their goal here, and they don't want resettlement. And I just it's
They do, just
freaking
not
heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But that's the piece that really just boggled my mind. And you know, we need to push toward the day after conversation when there's like just absolutely no viability of that at this stage.
Yeah.
Or funding,
Right.
from what I understand.
Well, I mean, the plan is that, you know, the Saudi and the Emiratis and other regional states will foot the bill for this now 8-month catastrophe, which has its own. You know, the question is, okay, what do they want for that, and what is Biden proposing that we give them? But I mean, kind of a final point I'll make on this is, you know, we see the administration's kind of framing of this is like it's all Hamas's choice. Now, I mean, you've got like the State Department spokesman like recording videos, like the only thing standing in the way of this ceasefire is Hamas, and that is just patently
False.
Everyone can see that is just complete bullshit, and like, and even bigger, you know, and this goes beyond just this issue. We're dealing, you know, in a situation, you know, and Biden himself has talked a lot about the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. And authoritarianism thrives on this idea that nothing is on the level. The government is always lying to you. Nothing is true. Just so believe what I am telling you, if that's pleasing to you. And like, to see the administration, and it's not just here, but this is just one of the starkest examples. I mean, throughout this entire conflict, you've seen statements from John Kirby in the White House or Matt Miller over at the State Department saying things that are just transparently bullshit. And I think the impacts of this will not be felt immediately, but they are going to be really serious. Like the ability of Americans to at least have some measure of trust in what their government is telling them has taken, you know, just a series of hits here.
Yeah, this is so fucking, every time Israel policy or Gaza comes up, it's just looking so fucking bleak. It's depressing. But I have better news, sort of, to share. So, so I just wanted to say a couple things about the election in Mexico. By the time the episode drops, everybody will have already heard from a bunch of places that Claudia Sheinbaum has been overwhelmingly elected as Mexico's new president. And her party, the Morena, they won control of Congress too. So they can run the table. They have enough control that they can push constitutional reforms. And every place where I see this getting coverage, they're talking about the fact that she's a woman, a PhD, a Jew. And this is all, I mean, true. But if you guess, I guess, like, if you think of Mexico as a giant machismo factory, then maybe she's the last person you would expect to like dominate Mexican politics. But the thing that stands out to me, and probably to the, you know, the audience here, is that she's a progressive. She's, I mean, like a leftist in like the best way. She knows her history. She ran on trying to address root causes of insecurity. She's anti-austerity, anti-neoliberal. She's promised to put the power of the state to work for the common good, like including a Mexican version of industrial policy. So that's all like really great news. The progressive angle that raises some questions for me, though, is that because she's a progressive, there's like signs that she's interested in a kind of cooperative coexistence with China, but Mexico also happens to be one of the few places on Earth that is positioned to maybe benefit from all of this supply chain resilience bullshit that the U.S. has initiated as part of China rivalry. So like reshoring and friendshoring manufacturing is specifically meant to contain Chinese power or to reduce America's exposure to Chinese influence. And Mexico is one of the places that, multinational firms are looking to friendshore the manufacturing that's meant to produce for the American market. So there's a potential tension here between like Mexico's geopolitical disposition under a progressive president and then trying to capture as much of global GDP for Mexico as she can in a world where, political economy is kind of fucked. So like, I haven't heard anybody talk about that angle. That was the part I just kind of wanted to raise.
This is, hugely important in a lot of ways. That's it's kind of not a particularly, astute observation. There is no country in the world that has more impact on the day-to-day lives of the United States than Mexico. For a whole range of reasons: trade, immigration, just families, our cultural relations. I remember. I'm ashamed to say that I only went to Mexico for the first time like 4 years ago. Went to Mexico City and then I went to Puerto Vallarta, and I really loved it. But part of what I loved about it was like it was so clear that that this is one civilization. If that makes any sense. It was just what I saw in Mexico. Just it was very familiar, even though the relationship has not been always a great one, and we certainly have not treated Mexico as an equal partner for a lot of reasons.
Oh, like we are one civilization.
No, I'm just saying, like, yes, the United States and Mexico, and I think there's a lot of Americans who would blanch at that, and I don't. I embrace.
Have you ever had Tex-Mex? It's like
a beautiful thing. I have. I
Spanish
recognize
colonial architecture. Like shit.
It, despite its problematic origins, I recognize it as a legitimate cuisine.
Yeah.
And a distinct cuisine. I think let's not discriminate here. Yeah. It's just really yummy. I hope you agree. But just back to my main point, it's like this. Obviously, it's a huge deal. All the things you said are right. To the extent that I've seen even some progressives raising concern about it, it's that okay, this is once again close to a one-party state. Morena dominated so
it's the
extremely.
Right party, at least. Yeah.
Right. No, we can imagine worse parties doing great. But there were some. I think people had some not illegitimate concerns about AMLO's approach. But yeah, all things considered, this is good news.
Yeah, totally. It's obviously historic. It's really cool to see a woman elected president in North America. To your point about the United States not treating Mexico like a partner, I'm not sure many Americans would consider Mexico a part of North America. But yeah, I'm definitely not an expert in Mexican politics by any means. I think it's cool to see a woman with a PhD and an environmental background winning the presidency. Very excited and truly and genuinely hope that she can address, a lot of Mexico's security issues, the industrial concerns. I know Mexico really stepped in during our trade war with China. So there's like a lot of partnership and collaboration opportunity there. To your point, Ben, about friendshoring, I will take my cues from the Mexican people, but I'm definitely gonna kind of be holding my breath to see how she governs, because I do know that having a PhD doesn't necessarily absolve you from destroying the environment.
How dare you?
The Morena Party has didn't they push forward this whole refinery project in the Xochimilco wetlands? I seriously am hoping for the best, but definitely not declaring this like a victory for the left or for women until we can kind of see how she approaches issues like that now that she's in office and no longer just supporting AMLO.
Yeah. I mean, part of how she benefited, though, like this, Mexico went the opposite way of like the de-alignment trend in most of the West, like the working class separating from labor-oriented parties and like the working class drifting right or whatever, or like finding alternative parties. This is, AMLO did a series of wage hikes at the lower end, like increasing minimum wage for workers. And that is obviously targeted toward the working class, and the working class turned out for Morena. And so it's pretty straightforward. Like policies, it's a test case that kind of validates that policies that actually directly support the working class, even if it's like incomplete, is going to curry favor with them. That's how politics is supposed to work. And like, I feel like in America, we bend over backwards to avoid, pandering to the working class with things that would make their lives better. Like what? Anyways,
yeah, it seems so obvious.
We're slightly starting to get over that, but
we'll see.
It's a long process.
Yeah. On a different topic, Julia, you got something about AI?
Yeah, so I guess this is our worst or best takes segment. Yeah, so my best take for this episode is a New Republic article by Bill Hartung, the inimitable Bill Hartung, and Michael Brennis, your co-author, Van. So they write about how artificial intelligence won't change the inherently destructive nature of war. This is based on a longer brief that they wrote for the Quincy Institute, which I recommend everyone to read if you're interested in artificial intelligence in the military context. But kind of the top line is really that they debunk venture capitalists' arguments that AI will not only prevent deaths on the battlefield, but that it's also going to deter China from making moves on Taiwan or otherwise taking aggressive action in the South China Sea. The kind of three main points are that, and this is glaringly obvious, but still worth mentioning, that venture capitalists have a lot of potential to make a shit ton of money as the Pentagon turns toward emerging technologies. Second, this is really not the first or the second time industry has convinced the Pentagon that shiny new tech will help the United States outpace its adversaries and ultimately prevent human casualties in war. I mean, that argument goes back to the 1950s, if not beyond that. And finally, military uses of artificial intelligence pose a lot more risks than anything else, especially when paired with unfortunate lack of attention to safeguards. There's a lot of conversation right now on the left about autonomous killer robots, for starters. But, like this technology could take off without being properly tested. And Michael and Bill capture that, I think, really well in this New Republic piece and in their Quincy brief. Yeah, what do y'all think about that?
I find it. I mean, the what they wrote was fantastic. It's super worth a read. My sense of AI, especially when you do something like Chat GPT software, it's fucking plagiarism software. Like it's third-rate quality kind of analysis. And so, part of what I think Bill and Mike are getting at is AI is not going to revolutionize warfare. It's not going to transform how we do what we do. What we do is the business of violence. And then how we get it funded is this speculative fucking tulip craze shit, where like literally the stock market right now, a third of it is speculation on AI companies, and this is all emperor has no clothes shit. And I read a piece in Jacobin maybe a week ago. It was about how AI and emerging tech is being used on the border, incidentally, with Mexico. And it's causing more deaths, record deaths of migrants, right? Because they have these giant towers with AI sensors on them, and the towers make big whirring noises, and you can see them from far away, and there's fucking little laser lights on them and shit. And the AI cues to, pick up bodies coming across the border, and because they're so visible, anyone who's trying to cross the border is obviously going to try to avoid this stuff when they see it or know about it. And so they're forced to cross in the most lethal, the most dangerous places. And this is leading to an accumulating body count that's getting worse like year on year. And so the smart border technology, which is AI powered, it's being deployed in a way that the consequence is not reducing migration. It's actually migration is increasing, illegal migration, and the death count is increasing. And so who benefits from this? Basically only the companies who are getting paid, the VCs who are bankrolling AI firms. And then meanwhile, everybody else has to eat shit or pay one way or another. So kind of like a nightmare, you know?
Yeah, it's truly a living nightmare. And they got that technology for the border from Israel, right? Like Israel's using lavender, what's the other one? The gospel. And
tested
I
in the
think
fucking West Bank. Yeah.
Yeah.
and the
Well, no, I
theory
mean, there's
is
been a great 972 magazine did a number of exposés on the use of AI in coming up with, quote unquote, targeting packages, a term that is awful, for Gaza. And it just churns out these targeting lists, and you've got a human being at the end of the process who spends a couple minutes going, okay. And it's absolutely insane. And I think that goes to what you were saying. It's not that it's doing a better job. It's just giving you more shit to work with to check a box.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And if AI is theoretically going to be used to be more discerning in lethal strikes, which we shouldn't be doing anyway, we find that this technology is being used to actually just increase murders, whether it be on the border or in Gaza or in the West Bank. And I think the other thing about this is like these companies, Van, you said earlier, we're kind of, we see stock market prices changing like based on speculation. And it's part of this broader trend in defense in the industry where companies are operating off of the securities market rather than their productive capacity. So even if, like, for example, Microsoft's cloud computing effort for the DoD, the Joint Warfighting Cloud Computing capability, like, sure, we do need better access and centralized data within government agencies so that folks can make informed decisions theoretically. But when you have companies that are getting their loan guarantees from the Pentagon's new Office of Strategic Capital, which is essentially a corporate welfare office.
That's some evil shit, but yeah.
There's no incentive for them to do anything well, much less produce a product that works the first time. They just get to, continue fixing the errors that they make because they have the IP, especially when it's something like, cloud computing, which is a lot more benign than, a lethal targeting system or a surveillance system. But even still, like, it is just such a leech. And the fact that the Pentagon is kind of uncritically taking on this generational investment in artificial technology because it's going to save us from the pesky, reality of ground wars and fighting in the battlefield, and it's going to deter all of our adversaries. I mean, it's like they're living in a fairy tale, and it's the same things we've heard for decades, which really confounds me.
Yes. There's more I want to say about this, but I'm going to hold fire for now. Julia, you had also a worst take to share. Am I right? That was the best take.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was. Worst take is actually related to this idea that technology is going to save us all and make war a lot, quote unquote, easier in terms of fighting on the battlefield. But yeah, so Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker, not someone that most people know about, probably. You're not missing much. He has a new report out. It's called Peace Through Strength. And it is a crazy town take that we should add $55 billion to the fiscal year 2025 national security budget with the broader goal of increasing military spending to about 5 or 6% of GDP in the next 5 years. But before I kind of unpack some of the proposals he makes and why this suggestion is so wild, it needs to be said that this man, first of all, 72 years old. Second of all, he takes more money from the arms industry than any other member of the Senate. He's the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, which is one of the committees responsible for drafting our annual policy bill. That's
are you saying those two things are related?
They
the thought.
color the way that we should think about his proposals. I'm not saying age, inhibits you from weighing
No,
in
not
on
the age
policy,
thing.
obviously.
The money
corruption thing. Yeah.
yeah, the blatant corruption thing. Yeah.
Yeah, blatant corruption. It's just like so egregious. The fact that he could write this report and go on for 50 pages about how we need to invest a generation in his words, restoring America's military strength for decades to come is pretty rich coming from someone. Yeah. Yeah.
We have none, and we need to make some. What the fuck? Keep going.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's invoking the Reagan doctrine to do it, which suggests that Reagan's buildup, won us the Cold War. Another wild assertion. But yeah, it's nuts. I think what pisses me off the most about this report is that he actually accurately identifies a lot of really concerning trends in national security spending, but then lands in just like the completely wrong place. For example, he talks about how U.S. interest payments on the debt are going to outpace, the president's Pentagon budget request this year, which was $850 billion. Our interest payments this year are going to be $870 billion. And then in the next, graph, he's like, this means that we need to add $55 billion to the budget this year. It's like, dude, you're not going to be around. You really don't give a shit about those of us who are, that are going to have to pay for this for the rest of our lives.
Set that next generation on fire. Yeah.
What business does he have? It's just so obnoxious. But yeah, it's he talks about interest payments on the national debt. He talks about, we're not paying enough attention to how much China's spending on their military. He says that, China manages to field all these systems, new weapon systems, really, really quickly and for very cheap. And so the answer must be that we have to spend more. It's you don't see, it's to make that observation and still come to the conclusion that we have to spend more when our quote unquote pacing threat is fielding cheap weapons in mass quantities. That's what he gleans from China's strategy here. And then the last thing I'll say about it is just that he quotes a former Pentagon official, the former Undersecretary for Policy, Brian McKeon, who in 2016 talked about how the United States had this incoming bow wave in defense spending. Now, Roger Wicker quotes this man saying, us folks at DOD, we're thanking our lucky stars. We're not going to be around to pay for it. And then literally the next sentence is, again, we need $55 billion to increase fiscal year 2025 national security spending to $950 billion. I think it's also noteworthy that that would just super blow past the debt deal, not that the debt deal restrained national security spending anyway, because there was a huge loophole in it. But yeah, it's really rich. It's gotten a lot of play. Obviously, the Wall Street Journal editorial board was super supportive. The Senate's going to vote on it next week. And yeah, it's scary stuff. It's really, really scary stuff that we're seeing these arguments for generational investments in military strength through more and more money for contractors, whether it be AI or otherwise.
Yeah. This Roger Wicker shit is part of a whole genre of bad takes that pretends America doesn't even have a fucking military. We have the most lethal, modern, globe-spanning military in world history, literally. And these guys act like we're fucking babes in the woods. It's so full of shit. And actually, Congressman Jamal Bowman had some shit to say about this when he went on the Breakfast Club last week. The show is hosted by Charlemagne the God. It's the biggest morning show in hip hop, probably in the Black community. And I have a post about it in my undiplomatic newsletter because in the interview, he said a bunch of shit about foreign policy, but one of the things that he took to task was this Roger Wicker bullshit about peace through strength. So Bowman said straight up, let me find the quote, actually. I want to get this right. It's a crazy quote. Nikki Haley is a white supremacist, man. there's there's people like her in Congress who believe in peace through strength. And peace through strength means peace for white people and will kill and bomb and destroy any other country, particularly black and brown, if we want to. That's what peace through strength means. End quote. And so this hyper masculine way of thinking about military power and war preparation, it's not, I don't think it's beneficial to white people either. I mean, he's Bowman's right that it comes disproportionately at the expense of like not just black and brown communities, but also anyone who's working class, anyone who's economically precarious, interest on the debt, the opportunity cost of investing in defense. Like peace through strength is not a real theory of security either. Like it's a meme for chauvinists. And so trying to build a foreign policy around a chauvinist vibe, that's just a way to fucking loot and plunder the general welfare.
Yeah.
And the double tragedy is that it fails on its own terms. Like military primacy does not make us more secure. It thrusts us harder toward war. So fuck that guy.
I mean, I think that's right. And here I'm gonna, this is not what I had planned to be my worst take, bad take. And I'm not going to call it either of those things, but I think it really relates. It's something we had talked about earlier. And the fact that we're recording this today on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The president was over in France along with other European leaders, along with obviously Macron, Ukraine, Zelensky, to mark the 80th anniversary. And, and I've struggled with this, because on the one hand, obviously, there's no doubt that what occurred on that day 80 years ago was extraordinary. The sacrifice by countless young men was extraordinary. And yet the way that the memory of that day and that war has been deployed repeatedly to justify a lot of bad stuff, and the kind of role it plays in our national security conception and our cultural conception is in a lot of ways really destructive. And that's a lot of what I was thinking about. And again, I mean, I'm saying this while acknowledging the importance of what occurred. But I think there's kind of two pieces I want to mention here. There was a great piece that I always go back to by Chris Hayes back in 2006 called, I think it was The Good War on Terror, where he writes about how, the late 90s, starting with, 1994, the 50th anniversary of D-Day, how we basically American culture spent the latter half of the 90s going through this massive cultural nostalgic exercise, The Greatest Generation, Tom Brokaw, right? Saving Private Ryan, all the anniversaries. And it was basically just this kind of self-glorification exercise with all the ugliness of war kind of sucked out of it. It was all just like, wasn't that awesome? We did this amazing thing. And Chris's argument, which I think is really, really right on, was like our culture was sort of primed to do the war on terror after 9/11 because of that late 90s moment. And there's another great book that came out in 2021 by Elizabeth Samit, who's an English professor, I think at West Point of all places, called Looking for the Good War, which is basically a book called, I think, explication of this idea that the representations of World War II in our art and literature and culture, and how this story we keep telling ourselves about this good war overshadows how like that was basically the last war around which there was any real meaningful consensus. And it's been used to power so much bad stuff that came after, and again, going to what Wicker wrote, it's all based on this idea that World War II showed us and showed the world that America is required to police the world. America is required to constantly plow all this money into defense, into weapons, at the expense of all of these other really important things that would make us a democracy worth defending.
Yeah, it's a huge, so yeah, I mean, what happened at D-Day and World War II just generally, it was, we treat it, especially policymakers, as like the synecdoche of world politics. It's, we generalize how the world works from this singular moment, but it was literally an exceptional moment in human history, right? Nothing resembled it It's, I mean, like, except maybe the destruction of Carthage or something. I mean, like, it's such a rare moment, and it happens to be paradoxically this most destructive, violent kind of moment that also had a kind of good, positive outcome in a way, like it's one of these rare moments that vindicates the use of military force for
Mhm.
political purposes that are sort of favorable, right? But like that's not normal. That's not the norm. And like the study of war is mostly not the study of achieving great political outcomes through militarized violence. It's mostly tragedy and avoidable shit and reactionary ruling classes dominating others and suborning
Yeah.
them and eradication. And like, that's what war normally is most of the time.
Yeah.
This World War II shit is very exceptional. And our pathology as American exceptionalists, which is like undergirding American primacy, is that they take this moment as like the self-validating universal for everything we do now. You don't get peace through strength. Like you said, you don't get the war on terror unless you think that World War II is constantly the thing we ought to be preparing for.
Mhm. Right.
Dean Acheson comes out of the fucking war and is like, man, that worked out great. Let's prepare for another one of those. And it's like, that's what we've been doing ever since.
Yeah.
It's like, it's fucked up our imagination. Yeah.
Yeah, it really has. I also think it's just it's pretty cheap and politically opportunistic for Biden visiting France to invoke, D-Day, in talking about like US support for Ukraine, for example. Like it is obviously historic and tragic that there's now a land war in Europe, and there has been for the past 2 years, but it is not the same situation. I mean, to draw a parallel in my mind feels extremely escalatory and wrong. And I just like, I don't like that he did that. He's done it repeatedly now. He's done it in the State of the Union. And you can say whatever you want about Ukraine aid and say that it's going to, revitalize our industrial base. You look at the supplemental, you can see that a lot of it is just additional, funding for the Pentagon that's not going to have anything to do with Ukraine in the long run. And it's just incredibly opportunistic. And yeah, it's pretty gross.
Also, he's meeting with Macron at a time when the Kanaki in fucking New Caledonia, which is a French colony in the Pacific, they're literally agitating for independence. There's literally violence and social disorder because Macron is doing this electoral referendum, like jury rigging, in order to like prevent them from getting self-determination. There's an actually existing colony. It's not even the only one in the Pacific right now. It's France and Macron who's preserving it. It's the United States who's meeting with Macron. What are they talking about? Not about self-determination for New Caledonia. They're talking about fucking D-Day. They're hanging out being like, isn't it great? Aren't we doing such great shit for the world? And that's glossing over an actual imbalance of power relations in the real world right now. So it's like, where's American leadership? Where's basic justice? Where are we on this? Why is it only ever fucking Ukraine, man? Why?
Yeah. But I'll just.
It's also wild to think about the peace through strength frame in talking about sustaining decades of military power in Wicker's words. First of all, he has no discussion of the recruitment issue, of how we're going to pay for it, doesn't give a shit about the generations that will bear the social and economic consequences of this military buildup. But thinking about D-Day, he doesn't even acknowledge the ways in which his plan would actually inhibit like our ability to do another D-Day if that were required. If, that situation came about and we actually, had another exceptional moment in time where we can actually work with our allies to overcome some kind of autocratic power that is in fact threatening the world. Throwing all this money at defense isn't good for readiness, much less our ability to actually recruit the people in order to sustain the military equipment we already have. Not even talking about, an arbitrary 357, ship goal for the Navy. Like the D-Day lens is effectiveness in the ability to actually deploy when a moment in time like that actually does come about. And Wicker fails to acknowledge that completely.
Well said. Matt, did you have a best take?
It's my real best take.
Yeah.
Well, I think probably my best take is going to be something that Senator Chris Van Hollen said at an event he did at Center for American Progress on Monday, where he called for the sanctioning of Bezalel Smotrich, who's one of these very right-wing Israeli government figures. And the reason I'm saying that is, the situation in Gaza and Israel-Palestine is obviously awful right now, and I nor anyone really imagines this is going to be in a better situation anytime soon. But I do think, for those of us who really want and hope and are planning and trying to come up with ideas for how you resolve this, U.S. policy has tended to take an approach that punishes the Palestinians and rewards the Israelis. I mean, it's all carrots, and it's all carrots for Israel and mostly sticks, and the occasional carrot for the Palestinians. And that's been part of the problem in my view. And I think the reason I liked what Van Hollen said, and I think it's really important, is that if we're going to put these things on a better track and kind of empower voices amongst the Palestinians who can say credibly, like, let's invest in an actual diplomatic process to achieve our liberation, which is kind of the story that we and others have been telling the Palestinians for years. It's like, okay, end terrorism, invest in nonviolent diplomacy, and you'll get an end to the occupation and the state. And the reality, of course, has been the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we're going to change that dynamic, part of doing that is showing that, okay, we are taking steps against Israeli officials who are part of this settlement enterprise, who are deepening this occupation, whose ultimate goal is to completely just essentially plant you all in a bunch of Bantustans, right? Because that is Smotrich's goal, is to create, Palestinian Bantustans across the West Bank, with Gaza being essentially the largest Bantustan. So if we are really going to get things on a path toward a better and more peaceful and durable resolution, I think shifting U.S. policy in such a way that we're actually imposing real consequences on these violent actors, not just on the ground, but in the government, I think that's an important step. So I appreciated Van Hollen coming out and saying that.
Yeah, I agree. It does, I say this half jokingly, it does make me wonder, the House just passed a bill sanctioning the fucking International Criminal Court,
right?
And they've got another bill that's going to sanction the Maldives for banning Israeli passport holders. So
our ancient enemy, the Maldives.
Primordial conflict, the Hatfields and McCoys. It's like rogue axis of evil. Yeah, but it's like, okay, so is the next step then for Congress to sanction Chris Van Hollen for advocating sanctions, right? I mean, if you're extending the logic for what we're doing to the Maldives and the ICC, then Congress should be sanctioning Van Hollen. And I say that because Van Hollen's correct.
That's right. I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, and he did talk about this too. He said, and I think it's right when you look, even though some Democrats regrettably did vote for that dumb ICC sanctions bill, it was not nearly enough to indicate it's going to have any chance in the Senate. So it's a dumb bill, shouldn't have been introduced, let alone passed in the first place in the House. But it's a stunt bill that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, Congress is up to a lot of dumb things right now that we're in the messaging season.
That's right.
So much leadership. Leadership.
Right.
Impressive.
World's greatest deliberative body, folks.
Yeah, right. Democracy at work. Senate just shot down a bill to codify the right to contraception yesterday. So we love to see it as we fight autocracy worldwide.
Yeah, I haven't seen the actual text, but in the 900 pages for MAGA 2025, the policy plan for MAGA,
the heritage,
I focused on the foreign policy parts, but there's apparently a section where they talk about massively restricting birth control for women, which is it's just egregious, Anyways,
I saw somebody from Heritage yesterday tweet out a picture of the big inflatable IUD that an advocacy group put up outside of Union Station here in DC, and he was like, "Yeah, the left is worshiping their pagan gods. Like, it is unreal what's happening over there, truly.
Anyways, this is fucking horrible.
See that guy on the street, it's on site, seriously.
Yeah. I have a best take this week. Should be quick-ish. It's actually research in the American Political Science Review. Brian Rathbun, Chris Parker, and Caleb Pomeroy. They have this article called, let me find it, Separate but Unequal, Ethnocentrism and Racialization Explain the Democratic Peace in Public Opinion. So democratic peace theory predicts that democracies don't fight wars with each other. The question has always been why. And so different scholars propose different mechanisms. Like, is it really capitalism, a capitalist peace? Is it that democracies are just more peaceful? Is it about legal systems that restrain power, right? There's so many proposed explanations. And one of those proposed explanations is that democratic publics have a voice and prefer not to go to war with fellow democracies, right? And so these authors ran 2 survey experiments where they found that the term democracy inadvertently primes the presumption that target countries are predominantly white. So when you poll people and ask them about their preferences, when you ask them about hypothetically going to war against another country and it's a democracy, they assume that you're talking about a white country, right? And this implicit racialization, the authors find, explains the reluctance of the American public to support aggression against fellow democracies, most notably among respondents higher in ethnocentrism, who disproportionately drive the democratic peace treatment effect. And then they say, quote, our results suggest that the democratic peace in public opinion is largely an ethnocentric and racialized peace. And so this insight might account for why democracies are actually quite war prone against non-democracies, because the non-democracies is the brown folks. And so these authors, except for Russia, these authors are saying that the democratic peace is actually a racialized peace, to the extent that non-war between democracies is because the publics have a say. So this is not like hot takes in the news or whatever, but like, this is kind of like an interesting thing. That's a new insight, makes me rethink some stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a parallel there too, between like the way that white people, mostly in rural parts of America, respond to social justice, thinking that their economic opportunity is somehow threatened by other people having rights. It feels like there's a parallel there, maybe, in terms of seeing, other countries that don't meet, our standard of democracy actually succeeding economically, growing, developing trade relationships. I don't know. That's just kind of my initial reaction, that there seems to be some kind of relationship there potentially. And yeah, I think that relationships in the geopolitical realm tend to mirror those that we have at home.
Yeah, so the one thing that this raises, that you're raising also, is like, when we do causal analysis, cause and effect, or when we survey the preferences that people have, we don't often control for racial bias. So we build theories and we find insights, and we discover preferences and all this stuff. And if underneath it's being motivated by a racial framework in some way, do we actually, we're not perceiving reality and how things are caused and all that stuff the right way. So like, I don't know. It's something to think about and control for more. Final segment. I don't know if you guys have one, but we're going to do a final segment called By the Numbers. And so one of us is going to bring a number. That number is going to be the starting point for a story, right? It's going to shed light on a problem or a solution. It's going to be edifying. It's going to be a number. So I've got a number this week, 3.8 billion with a B. And when Jamal Bowman went on the show, The Breakfast Club, he said 3.8 billion is what the U.S. provides in aid to Israel. And he was asked, like, why should Black Americans care about Palestine? And part of his answer was that 3.8 billion. So he said, quote, we send 3.8 billion to Israel every year. They're already a wealthy country, already a powerful country. They don't even need our 3.8 billion. That's 3.8 billion that could be coming to Mount Vernon, Yonkers, Bronx, New Rochelle, all the communities that have been redlined and neglected. What we spend in the military can be coming here. Not all of it. We got to defend ourselves, but more of it, right? So that's why it matters. It matters. Like, I don't want my taxpayer money going to commit genocide. I want my taxpayer money coming here to help me have childcare, to help me pay for my housing, to help me develop myself in terms of the workforce, help me pay for education, transportation, quality of life. We have the biggest wealth inequality in this country since the Gilded Age right now. And in my district, when you look at every outcome, health, education, economic, wealth, Black and Latino people are at the bottom. And so that money that we spend on genocide can come here to help us. And that's 3.8 billion. It's one of the best expressions that I've seen that relates what we're not getting when we do the Roger Wicker peace through strength shit, you know, 3.8 billion.
Right. And the usual DC response would be like, well, that's money that is going to our defense industry. It is creating jobs here, which is not only not true, but it's also the 3.8 billion. I mean, Israel gets a special deal wherein some very high proportion of that money can actually be spent on Israel's own defense industry. So, I mean, awesome. Not only are we not spending it here, we are helping to subsidize the growth of a defense industry which competes with us to sell weapons and tech to the rest of the world, but also to the region, which helps to regional undemocratic governments suppress their own people. So it's bad for a whole lot of reasons.
Fails on its own terms.
Yeah.
And the jobs that it does creates, which, like, to be clear, we know that healthcare and education are better jobs generators, but like, what jobs are they creating? Probably for electrical engineers, not like working class people. Also, like, are those the jobs that we really want to build long term? No. But the facts don't matter to the folks who continue to peddle those arguments.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the last thing I would add here is, like, you know, that amount, I mean, it's steadily risen over the years. You've had, you know, every few years it'll be kind of reassessed. I mean, it used to be like 3.4 or 3.2 billion in the Obama administration. Had this memorandum of understanding where it was raised to the 3.8, but a lot of this goes back to the Camp David Accord between Israel, Egypt, and the United States, and that's part of why Egypt also gets, it's not 3.8, but I think it's 2 point something billion a year. And like the Camp David Accord and the arrangements that came out of that, very much a Cold War artifact, right? Because the big deal about the Camp David Accord was this is how we brought Egypt over into the U.S. side, into the U.S. camp, and out of the Soviet camp.
Yeah.
And questioning the logic of that is like questioning, religion. I mean, it is part of the basic, it's one of the confessions of faith.
What are we getting out of so much of this stuff?
Right. That is a really important and long overdue question to ask. What have we really gotten, and what have been the kind of externalities and costs of subsidizing the Israeli defense industry, obviously subsidizing, the Egyptian regime, which we continue to do. There are serious costs here too, but we don't see a willingness to really look at those squarely yet.
Yeah. All right.
Yep. Could not agree more.
All right, gang, that's going to do it. You want to help us out? Pass our show to a friend. Shout us out on socials. Rate and review us wherever you hear this shit. And this is promising. Some of these themes I think we're going to be talking about in future episodes. So thanks for coming on, guys. See you next week, I guess.
Thanks, friends.
All right.
Thanks, y'all. See you next time.
Take care, guys.